Hello, I am Ryan, and what I've really learned, first as a student, then as a high school teacher, and now as a consultant, is that it is very easy to point to the absence of creativity inside the class. But it's much more meaningful to be able to look for its presence. And that's why I'm really glad to be sharing a room with all you guys. I mean, talk about some creative education that we've heard so far, right? So this is amazing. So when I was preparing for this talk, I actually got some great advice from an educational consultant that I have a great deal of respect for. So Stephen Hurley told me that he stopped asking questions like, what are the barriers to creativity in schools? Instead, he's been asking students and teachers and parents, when were you at your most creative? Then he asked a very important follow-up question after that. He says, what do you think allowed for that creativity to happen? Now, these are the types of questions that we need to be answering more often. So as this slide clearly shows, and as the introduction from Dawn clearly indicated, I'm all about music. I believe I can be at my most creative when it comes to music. Now, what is it about music that allows for creativity? Let's ask science. Dr. Charles Lim is a researcher and surgeon at Johns Hopkins University, and he studies creativity by shoving jazz musicians in MRI machines. He's really interested to know what the brain does in the process of improvisation, and he's noticed a couple of really interesting things. Firstly, he saw a real change in the medial prefrontal cortex. This is an area that's thought to be associated with autobiography and self-expression. As you can imagine, when someone's improvising, this part of the brain goes way up in activity. At the same time, though, there's this other part of the brain, the lateral prefrontal cortex, which is thought to be associated with inhibition. Activity there goes way down. There's another researcher that also looks at the brains of musicians using MRI. His name is Dr. Daniel Levitin. And he's noticed something about this part of the brain. It's the corpus callosum. It's actually the bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain. And he's found that really creative people, like really good jazz improvisers, tend to have a larger corpus callosum than other people. So what do we make about this? Well, two things I can distill from these two different studies. I can be my most creative when I have a personal and uninhibited connection to something. And secondly, I can be most creative when I'm able to make connections. All right, so now you're all amazed by my deep and nuanced understanding of complex neurobiology. Let me tell you why I think those two things are true, not based on necessarily science, but based on my own personal experiences, both with music and with education. This is me in high school. I want you to take a look at that mane. That is hair that only makes sense when you're holding a guitar. So obviously, with hair like that, I had to learn guitar. I picked up the guitar first in grade 9, and I spent a whole year learning it in a way that I kind of considered cheating. I was basically learning chords and songs from my buddies. We were sharing stories and basically playing with each other. Now, I thought this was cheating because this was very different from the music classroom that was around the corner from me. I came to realize later, though, that this is what allowed me to first develop a really personal connection to my craft. I was making connections between ideas, but I was making connections with people in the process. After a while, though, I did realize that learning from people at my same level could only get me so far. So I did want to pursue a private tutor, and I found a great one. His name was Lauren. And Lauren changed my life, not just musically, but also in terms of the way I would approach education much later, because he showed me this. Now, this might not look revolutionary, but it is. This is the pentatonic scale. This is basically the 5 notes that are at the very core of rock music in the Western world. So not only is it the 5 most important notes, it's also super easy to learn. There's only 2 notes per string. It's arrayed in this very easy to understand pattern. It takes 3 minutes to memorize. But it's not memorizing it that's important. It's what you do with it. What the pentatonic scale really is, it's a framework for creativity. And what I mean by that is there's a bunch of rules that are involved in this. There's boundaries to this. There's only 5 notes that I can play when I'm using the pentatonic scale, right? So it gives me guidance. It allows me to be successful because those notes sound really cool together. However, within this framework, within these boundaries, there's tremendous opportunity for me to explore those connections in any number of ways. So my lesson looked something like this. Lauren would pound out some chords like this, usually 3 chords at a time, keeping it nice and simple for me. And he would say, all right, jam on it. And he gave me the opportunity to explore this framework any way that I wanted to. Very quickly, I started taking a tremendous amount of ownership of this education. I was taking that ownership, number one, because it was me who was creating. I wasn't learning other people's tunes, I was making them, and it was making sense to me. Secondly, I was the one who was evaluating it. Lauren wasn't a big test guy. He was a hippie from the 70s. You know, he didn't give me playing tests, let alone written tests. However, when I was doing something right, I could tell you, because I could hear it. When I was doing something wrong, I knew as well. And finally, I was taking ownership of my education because it was me who was asking questions. Perhaps the most important question I asked was, well, why does that scale work with those chords? And I started answering that question, and I started seeing patterns on my own, and based on those patterns, I could make some predictions and extrapolations. What would happen if I played over different chords? What additional notes could I add to give some more flavor to my improv? Now, those are questions that allowed me to take my education to the next level, not because he showed me how, but because he gave me a tool to explore. So much later, I became a high school teacher, and I was always looking for a similar framework for creativity to give my students. Early on in my career, I happened to teach a really great kid named Jamie. Now, Jamie, a grade 11 student, like so many students his age, had basically been rewarding his lateral prefrontal cortex for the previous 10 years of his education. He had learned that if he just stayed quiet, behaved himself in class, eventually the lesson would be over, and he wouldn't have to take any risks like asking a question or maybe being wrong in front of his peers. So when dealing with Jamie, I actually had a great conversation with a fellow teacher named Adam. He's back there in case you wanted to go talk to him. And a fellow musician and fantastic educator. Adam taught business studies to Jamie. And Adam had this interesting idea. He had heard that Jamie was really good at freestyling. Turns out this kid could spit rhymes. Always wanted to say that in front of an audience. And he had this crazy idea. He's like, well, what if we gave his business studies class a different type of assignment, or particularly just to him? What if he could actually freestyle his final paper? It's an interesting idea. This interesting idea actually then turned into something very special. Everyone see that warning, right? As soon as Jamie found out about this, he became very, very excited. What started as an idea is like, maybe he can spit some rhymes in class. I said it twice now, that's awesome. But we actually got so excited about this, we're like, let's record a whole album. We got one of his buddies that made beats to come in to do that. I brought in my gear from my own home studio, and this was the result. I've never seen someone take to a project so well. He finally found a personal connection to something through the medium of hip-hop, whereas he previously had no connection to business studies whatsoever. When he had a personal connection, he was able to then make academic connections, and he was able to articulate his understanding with a level of sophistication that I had never seen from him before. But don't trust me. I'm going to turn things over to DJ Don over there. He's going to drop a beat for us and hear what Jamie said about globalization.
Yo, when I drop a poem, you know the flow is amazing. For the next couple minutes, man, it's globalization. Focus, be patient. I'm always nifty and clever. Information and money flow more quickly than ever. The world's coming together, becoming a smaller place. Nothing's far anymore, man, hardly even space. People around the globe are more connected than ever before. There's American stores around the world galore.
Pretty cool, eh? And after that, we actually let him sell the album. He had to market it around the school as sort of an applied form of his business education as well. And when we let him do that, there was an instant transformation. His participation in class went way up. His articulation, both verbally and in written form, became much, much more sophisticated and complex. And I think most importantly, Jamie got happier at school, because finally there was a connection to something, whereas previously there was nothing. Now, at this point in the speech, it would be very tempting to say something mildly arrogant, like Adam and I had given Jamie the gift of confidence. Now, here's why I'm not going to subject you to that. Number one, just from a rhetorical point of view, that's a terrible line. But secondly, it's not accurate. We have to stop thinking about education as a gift that we somehow give to our students. Education, much like creativity, is something that needs to be shared. If there's no reciprocity, then it's not a really fully meaningful experience. So sure, we had given him this framework for creativity, and he thrived in that. But in doing so, we gave ourselves an amazing pedagogical framework to be able to work in as well. It inspired us to be able to do more creative work. So after we recorded Jamie, well, this sort of just blew up. Over the next 8 years, I would go on to record 7 more full-length albums and 2 live DVDs at 3 separate high schools. In the process of this, my students taught me how to play drums. They inspired me to learn how to play cello. They made me a better guitarist. They made me a better teacher. So what allowed for that success? Well, I think in a word, improv allowed for that. And sure, there was the musical improv. You know, there was Jamie and his aforementioned spitting of rhymes. There was also the guitar improv that we used on the albums that we recorded. But I think more fundamentally, we were improvising in a different way. We were improvising on the curriculum. So the curriculum, I think, bears a lot of resemblance to the pentatonic scale. They're both frameworks for creativity. So we have a whole bunch of these expectations that I need to be able to fulfill, just like I've got a bunch of notes that actually I need to play if I'm jamming. Just like those notes, those expectations are put together because they have a relationship to each other. And just like the scale, that curriculum is a lot more interesting when I rearrange the notes rather than playing it in order. So I've since left classroom teaching, and I'm now consulting, and I'm very, very happy to find many different contexts for creativity and opportunities to improv outside of the classroom as well. So I'm a full-on convert to the EdCamp movement. So if you're not familiar with how an EdCamp works, think about it like this. So traditional professional development for teachers is like a recital, right? You go there and you sit down and you listen to someone else play their tunes, and then you applaud, and then you go home. EdCamp is like a jam session. Everyone comes in with an idea that they want to talk about, and it's actually the interaction and the discussion about those ideas that makes the PD that much richer. It's about talking and not just listening. It was at actually EdCamp Hamilton that one of the teachers came up to me and said, you know what, I basically jam over the curriculum all the time. She told me something wonderful, and if you are a teacher here, try this out. This teacher actually showed her students, her grade 7 students, the curriculum documents that she works with. It's just like Lauren showing me, these are the notes in the pentatonic scale. And then she said, well, she asked them, what type of assignment do you want to do based on those curriculum documents? They jammed over it, and then they composed on it. You guys shouted out for this before. I also work for 21 Toys, which is awesome. Love this company. I've been at 21 Toys now for a year, and I love them for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is that they speak the language of music that I've always loved. So 21 Toys uses play with these wooden puzzle pieces to be able to stimulate really deep discussions about things like empathy and failure. You know, play as a form of discussion, I cannot think of a more elegant way to define what good improv is. So I know what you're thinking. You're like, Ryan, that's all very good. Sum it up in 4 words. If I'm going to start trying to just explain why I'm creative, it always starts with apparently a slide that's missed with jam-ing. Should say jamming, in case you were wondering. So any good idea, any time that you're being creative, it starts with an improv session. Improv has a couple characteristics. Number one, it's shared. It's not being told to you. And there's an opportunity to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. So whether that's playing a scale or riffing with my friend about what type of assignments I can give Jamie. The next thing that we need to ask is, well, why? Why does the scale work with those chords? Why did that assignment work with Jamie, whereas other assignments didn't? After I ask why, composition, yes, composition is what that should say right there, because it's not enough just to be able to jam over something, because then you're just noodling. You need to actually have an actionable result at the end. So I've jammed, I understand why things worked and why things didn't work. create something out of that. Create a song, create an assignment, write a course. But don't stop there. The last ingredient in my 4-word solution is one of the most fundamental ideas in music, and it's spelled correctly once. I guess it makes sense. Variation is very important, isn't it? If I just play the same tunes every single time, ultimately I'm going to bore myself as a musician and a teacher, and people are going to pick up on that. If you write a song, it's not done. It demands reinterpretation. If you write a course, it's not done. Don't just grandfather the course to the next person that teaches that. Variation is what keeps things creative and keeps things rich. So overall, this is what allows me to be at my most creative. And I'd really like to talk to you guys after this. Meet me after the talk. We'll have a jam session. I want to know what makes you guys creative too. Thank you.